We'll begin this afternoon session on league theory and generalizations with a talk by Yves Benoit. Professor Benoit received his PhD from Paris 7 in 1983. Since then, he's had various positions in Paris, except for a brief time as visiting professor at Brown in 2008. In 2011, he received a Clay Research Award, and he's now the research director in Orsay. This afternoon, he's going to speak on recurrence on the space of lattices.
Thank you. Okay, so does it work? Yeah. So I'm very honored to be here and to express it. I put on a tie. It's an old-fashioned way to say it, but. And so I'd like to speak on recurrence on the space of lattices. There's been a long-standing project with my friend Jean-François Quin. And here is the abstract of the talk. So the project is a project from dynamical system, and we want to study dynamical system, so-called homogeneous dynamical system, meaning we are working on a space which is a homogeneous space of finite volume. And since it is a homogeneous space, it's homogeneous under a big group G. So, and I call it X, this homogeneous space. It is G over lambda. Lambda is a lattice. And I want to study the dynamics on this space of groups, subgroup of G. And classically, first we have studied one parameter group. Take one parameter subgroup of G and try to say something on the dynamics of this one parameter subgroups on the space X. And for instance, try to understand the orbit closure. So when this one parameter subgroups is made of hyperbolic elements, it's very much related to the geodesic flow. And when it's made of unipotent element, it's related to the horocycle flow. Here, I focus on a different situation where it's not the one parameter subgroup that I'm looking at, but more like a group spanned by just two elements which have nothing to do with one another. And so it will be a subgroup which has the technical property that its dialectic closure is a semi-simple. And what you usually want to study in this topic is to study the behavior, as I said, and the closure of one orbit. So we will describe that in the first part, so it will be a kind of dynamical part. And the main issue in this approach, and motivated by previous result, but was to try to understand this orbit closure by just choosing a probability measure mu on gamma, who supports span gamma, and start from the point X and work at random on the space X with transition probability from time n to time n plus 1 given by this low mu. And then try to say something on the law of the random walk for n large. And maybe say that it will equidistribute to something which is nice, because we want to say that the orbit closure is nice. So this is really the probability point of view. And so this will be the second part. But then we will see that a main issue, not a main issue, but a very important issue, and the only one I will focus on this talk, will be how do I know that my random walk is just not going to infinity? My space X may be non-compact and my random walk may go away to infinity. So how are we able to say that the random walk does not go to infinity? And this is this recurrent properties that I will explain in the second part. and I will try to enter in the technicalities how you prove recurrence is by constructing on X some kind of superharmonic function, f, which is proper and which is contracted by the law mu. And so you have to find this function, and at the very beginning it involves the geometry of the space of lattices, X, d over lambda, which is the space of lattices. And but then we will see that to prove that the candidate, this proper function, which is a candidate to be contracted by mu, to see that it actually is contracted by mu, you need to prove some kind of inequality from just linear algebra. Linear algebra, like second-year linear algebra. And we are stuck there in front of this inequality. And the solution to which led us to the proof of this inequality was representation theory, finite dimensional representation theory. So this is what the abstract of my talk. So I start again. So here is setting. My space X is a finite volume homogeneous space. It tells you that it is a quotient of some really group G. I don't assume anything about G by a lattice lambda. So lattice means that the volume of G over lambda is finite, meaning I am able to find in G a fundamental domain for the action of lambda, and this fundamental domain has finite volume for the R motion. And so as I told you, I want to study the dynamic on this space of some subgroup gamma of G. And the technical assumption, I just want to write it once, this technical assumption, is that this subgroup, the Zariski closure of the adjoint group is semi-simple with no compact factor. So why do I say it in such a kind of strange way? Is that I did not assume there that G is a linear group, so I cannot take the Zariski closure of gamma in G. So I go through the adjoint representation. So the adjoint group is just a linear subgroup. It's a subgroup of the linear group in the Lie algebra of G. And I take the Zariski closure, which is the smallest algebraic group, which contains gamma. And I want this smallest algebraic group to be a semi-simple group, and with no compact factor to simplify. It's not very important, no compact factor. If you start with G being already a linear group, then you can just say the Zariski closure of gamma is semi-simple with no compact factor. So this is a technical assumption, but what you have to keep in mind if you don't understand precisely this definition is just this example, and I will just discuss this example in my talk. So this example is X, the space of lattices. So discrete subgroup of RD, which admits a fundamental domain of volume 1. And as a homogeneous space, the group G is SLDR, and the stabilizer of one point, ZD, is SLDZ. And what you can have in mind for the group gamma is a group spanned by two elements. Very good to think of a group spanned by two elements. And two elements which are maybe given by block matrices of size D1 and D2, with D1 plus D2 equal D. And such that these two elements are not included in a smaller algebraic subgroup than SLD1R cross SLD2R. If you want, you may also assume that D2 is 0, so D1 is D, just a subgroup which is Zariski dense in SLDR. But if I have time, I will explain what is the issue with SLD1 cross SLD2 And okay, so these are the notation for the whole talk. And the main theorem I will discuss in today is just the orbit closure theorem. So it's very similar to, for those who know, to Ratner theorem. Ratner theorem deals with a group gamma which is spanned by one parameter unipotent subgroup. But I don't plan to recall all this story. I want to follow my path through up to the proof of recurrence and construction of function f. So this theorem tells you that, in fact, if I'm looking at the closure of any orbit, then the set you get is in fact very nice. It will be homogeneous, not only it will be a manifold, but it will be homogeneous of finite volume. So what does homogeneous mean? Homogeneous means, for a set F, it just means that the group of elements which preserve this set acts transitively on this set. And a finite volume means that on this set you are able to find a GF invariant probability measure. So this is the main theorem, the main topological theorem. And I think I have finished with the dynamical system part of my talk. And I'm switching, because as I told you, the way to prove this theorem now is to study the random walk starting from the point x0. So I have to introduce, I'm switching, forget about, I plan to, the M, this is the M of the whole talk. But to do it, I'm choosing a probability measure, mu on G, whose support is compact and spans gamma. So maybe this view that gamma is compactly supported, but you can remove this assumption later. So choose such a mu, and to prove this orbit closure theorem, we will first prove the stationary measure theorem, which tells you that every new ergodic, new stationary probability measure mu on x is d over lambda for all the top. First, it is gamma invariant, and then it is homogeneous. So, what does this mean? So I explain the word. So ergodic means that this measure nu, sorry, this is a nu here. Sorry, here this should be a nu. So this probability nu is extremal among the mu stationary one. Okay, and now I have to define what is mu stationary. Mu stationary means that nu is mu stationary means that nu is a fixed point under the convolution by mu. So what is the convolution is just, I'm just taking my probability nu and I'm pushing forward this probability nu by element g chosen according to the law mu, and I'm averaging them. So what is this convolution in probabilistic term? It tells you that if at time n I know that I am on my space x according to the law nu, and I apply one step of my random walk, then at time n plus 1, the law of my random walk will be given by mu convolution with nu. So stationary measures are really states which happens when you have waited for a very long time, in case the situation stabilizes under your random walk. So understanding stationary measure is kind of saying something about what happens after a long time for your random walk. And so these were the assumptions of this theorem. a nice example of stationary measure are just gamma invariant measure. Because if you are gamma invariant here, G star nu is equal to nu. So when you average, it's equal to nu. And what this theorem says first, it says that when you are stationary, conversely, in this special case, you are gamma invariant. And the conclusion of this theorem is that very similar to the conclusion of the orbit closure theorem, is that your stationary measure is homogeneous, meaning the stabilizer of this measure acts transitively on the support. Meaning this probability measure nu is one of the nu f in the previous slide. It's associated to a finite volume homogeneous subset. Okay, so this is the main theorem, and I don't plan to say anything about the proof of this theorem. It relies on some argument which is called exponential drift argument that we introduced, but I will not speak of that. And one remark there is that we may wonder how many possibilities are for the gamma invariant and homogeneous probability measure on X. And in fact, there are just countably many possibilities, except that you have the centralizer of gamma, which may act on them. So there is just a countably union of L orbit. If you keep in mind the example of SLD1 cross SLD2 as a Zarinsky closure, so when D1 is not equal to D2, there is some centralizer, which is the matrices which are diagonal, which are scalar on those two blocks. Okay. So simultaneously, so I wanted to state this theorem because simultaneously we get some kind of equidistribution of the random walk. So we don't get the best one. The best one would be without this César walk. Sorry. Keep it. The best one would be without this César average. So what is said here is that starting from any point x0, very important, any point, not almost any point. Starting from any point, if I look at, so at time 0, I think that I have the Dirac mass at the point x0. Then I have my random walk at time 1, I have mu convolution delta x0. And this probability measure is the law of my random walk at time k. So I'm kind of César averaging. And what I'm saying is that this average converges to one of the homogeneous gamma invariant probability measure, and the one for which the orbit closure is F. So you have an equidistribution in César average. So open question, remove the César average. And I will just say quickly a word how from the classification of stationary measure, I can deduce the orbit closure theorem and the equidistribution theorem. And it's very kind of easy because if you have the equidistribution theorem, you will get the kind of you prove both of them together. And what you notice, you consider this César average, and it's a sequence of probability. And you take a weak sublimit. So it will be a measure, a positive measure, finite positive measure on X. And because we are César averaging by something called Kakuta trick, it's very easy that any limit of subsequence will be mu stationary. But by construction, they will be supported on F, on the orbit closure. So this weak limit, I would like it to be equal to nu f for any possible sublimit. So I want to prove that nu infinity is nu f. So for that, I have two things to check. One thing is that no mass is going to infinity. This is the fact that nu infinity is indeed a probability measure. And then decomposing nu infinity on all the gamma invariant homogeneous probability measure, since there are only countably many, I just have to check that nu infinity does not give any mass to the other probability, the other support of the other probability measure when the support does not contain or x, or does not meet the L orbit of x. But you can think here L as trivial case if you want. The case of the centralizer is trivial case. So this is what you have to check. And I plan to spend the rest of my talk just explaining what is in red. Why is nu infinity a probability measure? Why no mass are going to infinity? So this is the recurrence theorem. And it's just a restatement, nothing else, but in a different word of what was written, that no mass is going to infinity. How do you say that, except I am not Cesaro averaging here. So this statement tells you what? So I'm always in this setting, I didn't change my notation. And I have, let's come back here. I have my any point here, any point on the space of lattices, x, on G over lambda, any point on x of J lambda. And I'm looking at the law of my random walk at time n. And no mass is going to infinity is just saying that I am able to find a fixed compact set which does not depend on n. For every epsilon I can find such a compact set, such that the mass of what is not in the compact set, the complementary of this compact set, is bounded by epsilon. So this is what I have to check. And this seems difficult because it involves the random walks at any time. Time 1, 2, 3, 4, and n. So there is a trick to check this kind of thing. And this trick is, it's enough to construct some kind of, it is a trick which has been introduced by Foster and used in this situation by Eskin and Margolis. It is the fact that there exists, it's enough to check, to construct a function f which is proper, which is finite, at least at the point x0, and which is contracted by the random walk. So technically, it's written here, and it's very important that you read this because this is what I will try to construct in this talk. I will try to construct f satisfying these two properties. First, it's proper. Second, it's contracted by the random walk. So, for some technical reason, in fact, only when there is a centralizer, I have to allow my function f maybe to take at some point the value plus infinity. So it's a non-negative function f, and proper means that it goes to infinity when I go away to infinity on x. But maybe there are some points where it is infinite. But at least at x0, it's finite. So the function f here depends on x0. For every x0, I should find one function. I should have written f depending on x0, but I didn't do that. Okay? And so this is the properness. And what about what means contracted by mu? So main point is this inequality. P mu is the Markov operator associated to the random walk mu. It takes a function f to the function p mu of f, which is the average of f of gx d mu of t, which means that it is the expected value of this function f after time 1 of my random walk. And what I want here is a very strong superharmonicity condition. The average here, the average of f, is not only smaller than f, but smaller than f times a factor which is smaller than 1. So think A is 1/2. Maybe up to some additive error. So this function is going to infinity, and in expectation, from time n to time n plus 1, I know my function is multiplied by 1/2. Maybe up to adding some fixed constant. But when I'm far, far away, f is very large. So this constant you don't see. You just see that you divide by f by 2 in average. So you need like a 2 or 3 line computation that I didn't want to write on the slides, which improves that once you have f, you have recurrence. So when the centralizer L is trivial, this theorem 4 is due to Eskin-Margulis. The conjecture it should be true always. And in their case, you can find the function f to be finite everywhere. But generalizing, we need f to be. We cannot find f, and for some good reason. Because finite everywhere implies like you have some kind of uniform recurrence, and we don't have this uniform. We cannot choose this compact set K independent of the point x naught, while they can when the centralizer is trivial. So now I have to construct f. This is a new game I have. So, and it's much nicer because it involves just one step of the random walk. So I just have to give you a formula for f, and then to check that it works. Okay, in fact, I will construct for you this function f 5 times. Okay. And it always be in the case of the example in blue at the beginning. So the space of lattices here, and H will be SLD1 cross SLD2. But I let D1 and D2 increase. And you will see how at each step I manage to construct this function f. And in fact, the first 3 steps I will just explain the paper by Eskin and Margulis, how they manage, and then I will have to explain what we have to add. So now I'm like explaining this paper by Eskin and Margulis. So when you are dealing with SL2R over SL2Z, this is the space of lattices in R2. So you just have a nice lattice in R2, and you want a function of the space of lattice. And what you take is the systole. The systole is the length of the smallest non-zero vector in your lattice. And the function is just a negative power of the systole. And this is f. That's it. How do I check that? So first, I have to check that f is proper. But there is a criterion which describes the compact set in the space of lattices. If you have a sequence of lattice which goes to infinity, when those lattices are covolume 1, this means 1, you can find vector in each of them which go to 0. So the systole is going to 0. So this exactly tells you that this function f is proper. So you have nothing to do. And proper, now I forget. So the main point in the talk will be checking that f is contracted by mu. And for that I have to choose where the negative power here. It will be very small negative power. and it will rely on the positivity of the Lyapunov exponent. And this is what is written here is a theorem which tells you that the Lyapunov exponent is positive. So this theorem is due to Furstenberg, but it has been written this way by Eskin and Margolis. And it tells you that so H is my Zarinsky closure of gamma, and I have an irreducible, non-trivial representation of H. So here V is just R2. It's just R2 for this example, but later on I will reuse this theorem for more general situation. And what is important is to have non-trivial representation, and here I'm looking at the random walk on the linear vector space for the probability measure mu. And what happens is that trajectories are going exponentially quickly to infinity. So since you go exponentially quickly to infinity, you have this Lyapunov, which is strictly positive. Then when you average a negative power of the norm, then you get something which is really strictly less than the negative power of the norm. This is the value of the negative power of the norm, let's say at time n, and at time n plus 1, you have the expected value, which is divided by a constant a which is smaller than 1. And this is exactly positivity of the Lyapunov. Maybe you have to wait for, maybe it's not at the first step that this will happen. Maybe you have to wait for n0, but right now I will forget about n0 and think n0 is 1. And to be sure it occurs, you have to choose delta sufficiently small. So there exists a, n0, and delta such that you have this inequality. So the inequality we are looking for, which is this kind of inequality, at least it is satisfied for negative power of the norm V, even with no constant. So that's perfect. But my function I have given to you, so I'm trying to now, I take this general fact for granted. I don't want to prove it, you have to take it for granted. And I want to explain to you how this general fact implies that this function f is contracted by mu. And the reason is that, you see, f is a negative power of some minimum. So f is some kind of maximum of various value of v to the minus delta. So it's a maximum of something. And I'm kind of averaging the maximum of some function. And I would like to say it's bounded by I have here the average of the maximum, and I would like to bound it by the maximum of the average. But I cannot do that. So the main point is that you distinguish two cases. There is one case where the minimum is just achieved at one vector. So there is in my lattice a very, very small vector, and all the vectors which are not collinear to it are much larger. So in this case, when you compute p mu of f, it is the same vector or its image by G, which will give you the system of Gx. So when there is one vector which is much smaller than all the other, in fact you can directly apply that and you get that p mu f is bounded by a times f. You don't need the constant. So the problem is when you have two vectors which are very small and have almost the same size. So which are almost the same size. So call them v and w, these two vectors which are very small. But then you use this inequality that the norm of v times the norm of w is greater than the norm of the external product. But they live, these two vectors v and w live in a lattice of covolume 1. So this has to be larger, a multiple of the volume of the lattice. So it's an integer, a non-zero integer, so it's larger than 1. And so you see, it tells you that the systole has to be larger than 1. So there, F is bounded, uniform. So this is the argument. So you cut into 2, and when the minimum is really achieved at just one vector, you apply positivity of the first Lyapunov, and when two vectors are almost the same, you apply some kind of inequality among vectors and their exterior product.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Is this representation finite dimensional representation?
Only finite dimensional. Here, in this example, V is R2.
Okay.
And for all Malloc, it is finite dimensional representation. Okay, so now I'm going to increase the number 2 to 3. And so here, what is the answer? I'm again looking. I'm looking for some function f, and f will not be the systole of my lattice, but not a negative power of the systole, but I have to take into account the dual lattice. So I introduce not only the systole, but the systole of the dual, and negative power of them, and I add them, and this will be my f. And I have to explain why does just one of them, let's say f1, why f1 does not work. So if you try to follow the proof as before, then you have, as before, when the minimum is achieved at just one vector, you have this bound, and you have to deal with the case where it's achieved, almost achieved at two non-collinear vectors v and w. And you apply the same inequality. But now this is a vector in lambda 2 of your. So it's a 2 area in your 3-dimensional lattice. So this means it's a point in the dual lattice. So from this inequality, you see that those two are like of the size of the systole of x. But then, if there are, you see that the systole of the dual lattice must be much smaller than the square of the systole of the lattice you started with. So since you pass to some negative power here, you get that f1 is bounded by a multiple of square root of f2. So you get the square root of f2 here. So m might be very big, but you have the square root of f2. So you don't get a constant here. So that's why you have to call your friend alpha 2, which will have a similar inequality. And then you add those two inequality, and you get this, because you see square root of f1 plus square root of f2 is bounded by maybe some very small epsilon times f1 plus f2 plus a fixed constant b. So square root of f1 is much smaller than f1. So once you have that, you get this inequality. Okay, so it was the same argument, two parts. One part now that I take for granted, which is application of the positivity of the Lyapunov, and second part having nice inequality in the exterior algebra. Here you don't see the exterior algebra right now. You see you just see at least the exterior product of vectors. So let's do it for d-dimensional. Let's do it quickly. So here you introduced alpha I of x is the smallest covolume of all the I-dimensional subgroups you have inside your lattice. And so it's a kind of higher dimensional system. And you introduce Fi, which is a negative power of it, and you add everything maybe with some factor, some tricky power, but I don't want to enter into it. And so F is really like before. And again, you prove an inequality which is very similar to the one we had before, like when you apply your Markov operator. when the minimum is achieved at only one vector is divided by A, and when the minimum is achieved at two non-collinear vectors, you bound that way because the minimum is almost achieved at two non-collinear vectors that I may call U exterior V and U exterior W. Okay? And you always have this kind of inequality. So this is the square of the systole in dimension I, and then here I have something like the systole in dimension I minus j and the systole in dimension I plus j. So I have this kind of square root which occur here. And then I make some computation and I get what I want. Okay, so same strategy, exactly same strategy, like in dimension 2 and 3, but more systole in any intermediate dimensions. Now I want to go to the case where you have centralizer. And the first case where you have centralizer is the case where the space of lattices is in dimension 3, but your group gamma is in the upper left corner of 2 by 2 matrices. So your vector space R3 is the sum of R2 and of some part R. And the problem is that in this R part R, there is no expansion in this direction, because the random walk is not moving. It's just expanding in the R2 direction. So you cannot take the systole. You will not be able to apply Fürstenberg theorem there. So you just have to find a systole which takes just into account the expansion in the R2 direction. So you just take epsilon 0 neighborhood of the R2. Sorry. Epsilon neighborhood. So here I impose this condition V0 is bounded by epsilon 0, and I just take the component in the R2 part of any non-zero vector in my lattice. This defines some kind of strange systole, and I also introduce the same for the dual lattice. I take negative power and I add, and this will work for the same reason as before. But then I have to find a tricky inequality among exterior, which is this inequality that you can easily check. It's the exterior product, the plus part of the exterior product of any two vectors is bounded by the 0 part plus the plus part times the plus part of W plus the plus part of V, the 0 part of W. This inequality is completely trivial in this three-dimensional case, but this is this inequality that we want to generalize. And in the minus 2 minutes that are left to me, I will show my last slide. What is the function for the group SLB1 cross SLB2? Again, F is a negative power of a systole. The systole is the minimum of some kind of norm for some V plus under some condition that the V0 part is bounded by epsilon 0. But we have replaced here the norm by some max here. And what did I do? I have taken my vector V. V is I will have to introduce all the intermediate exterior product. And I decompose my tensor, my exterior product, into sum of V lambda. Where V lambda has a component lambda 1 in RD1 and lambda 2 in RD2. So lambda 1 plus lambda 2 is R. And we have to introduce this strange quantity, which happens to be 0 when lambda 1 is 0, and 0 when lambda 1 is D1, and same when, at least when, yeah, and you need also either lambda 2 to be 0 or lambda 2 to be D2, it's D2 here, sorry. And so the main thing is to have this max, not of norm, but of some kind of strange power of norms. So we found this, and to be sure that this function works, you have to prove some inequality. Here is the inequality you have to prove. It's a pure inequality in linear algebra. You are dealing with here tensor, U, V, W are tensor in RD, and you take the lambda component in this sense, and you want to bound the lambda component of U times the mu component of U exterior V exterior W with the new component of U exterior V and the rho component of U exterior W. Exactly like in the case of the case C. But I have to restrict myself to kind of very strange condition I have to add here. I don't take all the new law for which nu plus rho is lambda plus mu, but just those. And it's very tricky if you try to deal with special case of this inequality and to prove it. And the key point to prove this Mother inequality is that you have to state it for any semi-simple Lie group. And then it became simpler to state and much simpler to prove. And you interpret the U lambda just as the projection of your vector on the sum of your subrotation with highest weight lambda. So lambda now is a dominant weight, and you have a very similar inequality. And then when you have stated it that way, you know how to prove it because you use representation theory. Thank you.
So we have just 1 minute for questions. Any questions? Yes.
So you have looked at reconversions here and proved that there's no escape of mass. If you look at convergence of moments, you are in a situation similar as for the upper bound and the quantum state of Oppenheim. Have you got any results there? See what I mean? So you look at test functions that grow in the cluster.
No, I just no, we did not look at that. I mean, that's the first step. Our main concern would be maybe to remove the César break, which looks more promising to us, but.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for. And the IMU committee have asked me to thank Professor Benoit by presenting him with this gift for his wonderful talk.
Thank you.
We'll restart in 15 minutes.